try to make every film as if I didn't know how to do it. And not knowing how to do it is the best way to remain inventive and not to build on experience, because experience can be terribly in the way.
What is the first film you remember watching as a child?
I don't remember. I mean, I have a memory which didn't really prepare me for my profession, because my first film that I saw, I was 6 years old, and I went with my grandmother to a cinema, and I think she wanted to see a Laurel and Hardy film with me, a comedy, but she was not an experienced moviegoer, and we went into the wrong entrance, and we walked into a horror movie. And she took me, and she didn't understand what was happening. She didn't know it was the wrong movie. And I left the theater crying, shouting. I crawled over the heads of people because it was a packed theater. And I just wanted out. And for years I had to sleep with light on because I had nightmares from that movie. So my first theater experience didn't exactly prepare me for my profession.
And so then what was the U-turn, one might say? What was the big change in inspiration in relation with cinema?
It was a year that I spent in Paris wanting to become a painter, and I had lessons, and I had a great teacher, and I was learning the craft of etching. And we were 20 students, and we spent the whole day until 2 or 3 in the atelier of this painter and etcher. And afterwards, I was free to do whatever I wanted, and I didn't have money. I couldn't go to a movie theater, and I needed a warm place because my room was very cold and unheated, and it was winter, and I didn't know what to do, and realized the cheapest warm place in Paris was the Cinémathèque. You paid 20 cents for one movie screening, and it was warm. And the 20 cents you could stretch all day, because between the movies you could go to the toilet and hide and then come back. So I spent in the warm for 4 or 5 movies and for 20 cents. So I had the extra money to buy myself a sandwich, and I saw about 1,000 films in 1 year. I saw each and every film of the Cinémathèque, and after a while realized that was a much better option for my life than being a painter. And it was painting in a whole different sense, and I realized movies was my life.
Well, that also leads on to the next question. Beginning your directing career, what was the first day of filming like?
The first day of filming was not so different from my days of painting. I had bought myself a 60mm camera from everything I had saved, a used Bolex camera, and with reversal film. They were little spools of film. They lasted 4 minutes. And I made one shot with each film because I didn't know about editing and cutting. So I took the one spool of 4 minutes and shot one scene only. And it was city scenes. It was crossings and views from a window. But it was always 4 minutes long, and there was no cut, and it always stopped because the film ran through and ended. So my first way of shooting was basically like painting.
And I would say that perhaps shows in some of your masterpieces. For example, Paris, Texas has many cinematic shots that are like a painting, perhaps.
Well, I started like a painter, that's true. I started like a painter. I knew everything about framing from painters, and I thought for a while filmmaking was about producing beautiful images. But sooner or later realized that was not at all what filmmaking was all about, but that storytelling was the key issue. And in that storytelling you would have to edit. And in the end, it wasn't about beautiful shots. Actually, the most beautiful shots were always in the way because the storytelling was the essential process. So sometimes you had to leave out your most beautiful shots. Even in Paris, Texas, some of the most beautiful shots ended on the editing room floor because they were in the way. They were about themselves and not about the story. So that's a long learning process, and I don't longer make films like a painter. I make films like a storyteller.
And about stories then, if your life story was a movie, what genre would you want it to be, and what actor would you cast as yourself?
I think the genre would be comedy. Now, I haven't never made a comedy, as you noticed, but my life and filmmaking as such is so often a comedy because things go wrong, you know? Many things go wrong. And if you're too serious about filmmaking, it's not good for the films you do. You have to remain open. And if one thing doesn't work out, you have to do another thing. I mean, in Paris, Texas, a lot of things didn't work out. I mean, it was a disaster in many ways. We lived from one disaster to another in the film, but because I didn't take myself so seriously that I couldn't say, well, then if that doesn't work out, I'd do this. And in the end, when I did this, it was so much better than what I had intended in the first place. So sometimes you have to learn from your mistakes, and you have to realize that what really counts is what's in front of you and not what you intended to do in the first place before anything was in front of you. I mean, filmmaking is a process in your mind before you make it, and you write a script and do whatever, and you have a plan, and you think you develop a certain style. But then you stand there in the landscape and you have your actors, and you have to come up with something that is different with what you wrote, because you realize what you wrote long ago is no longer valid, doesn't apply to the situation. So you have to be flexible. And so I think in many ways, my life as a filmmaker is more of a comedy than my movies themselves.
That is very beautiful. Next question would be, in your movies, there are often very original ideas, very new concepts, or old concepts but merged in new ways. What is your method for coming up with new ideas, and what can you give any tips to aspiring filmmakers out there?
Are you an aspiring filmmaker?
Perhaps.
The one important thing, I think, is that once you've done something, like say you make your first movie, like I made my first and second and third, and then I realized the worst thing to do was to do another film using your experience or building on your experience or building on your success. If finally you make something that's decent and that has your own handwriting, then the worst thing you can do is apply that method to the next film, because you think you know now how to do it, so you can do it exactly the way you did whatever was successful. Especially after Paris, Texas, I realized the worst thing for me would be to follow all the good advices that people gave me afterwards and all the expectations, and everybody said, now you can do another one like this. And doing another one like this was the worst thing I knew for me, for my life, for my profession, for what I wanted to be and what I wanted to do. I had to do the opposite. That was me. So I learned to never really build on something that you've done before. I try to start everything as if I've never done a movie. And I've stayed true to that. And I try to make every film as if I didn't know how to do it. And not knowing how to do it is the best way to remain inventive and not to build on experience, because experience can be terribly in the way. I try to be open, and I always try to mix it and refuse to remain inside a certain border or genre or restriction.
Looking back at the hundreds and thousands of movies that you've watched over your life,
Yeah.
who would you say were the big influences and inspirations that perhaps aspiring filmmakers can also look to?
I can give you my own inspirations. And if you watch Wings of Desire, at the end of the film, you realize I dedicated the film to 3 people. To François, and that was François Truffaut, to Yasujiro, and that's Yasujiro Ozu, and to Andre, and that was Andrei Tarkovsky. So I make it more simple. An inspiring filmmaker doesn't have to know the work of Truffaut, because there's no filmmaker with more tenderness towards the people in front of his camera, and with more love for them and with more love for life. So if you don't know the work of Truffaut, you already missed the basics. And the other one is the Japanese filmmaker Ozu, who is my great master and whose films I only got to know when I already made 4 or 5 films myself. It was too late to have a master, but then I realized, wow, there's a filmmaker who represented something like a lost paradise of filmmaking. And it's too bad I didn't know him before, but it's not too late. So I know all of his films, and they're for me the most pure form of cinema and the truest form of cinema. So I learned more, and I loved no other movies more than the ones by Truffaut and the ones by Ozu.
Looking at your career, you started, as we discussed, very small and bohemian, one might say, and then you became one of the namesakes of European and international cinema. How do you balance the fame and commercial aspect of it with your desire to create a form of art and to tell life?
Well, you never know when you make a film if it is commercial in any way and how people are going to see it. I always imagine when I make a film that I'm going to show it eventually to my friends. So I think of the audience as an extension of my friends. And if my friends like the movie, then I know it can potentially also reach an audience. But it's not why I make movies. I make movies because I feel I have to, each time, face the question, well, how should we live? What are the contemporary issues that really concern our way of living? And I think that question cannot be answered once and for all. They cannot make one film that answers the question how to live. With each film, and time changes, and we have seen so many changes in your life already, but in mine, you can't imagine. So you have to ask that question over and over again, and every year you make something that you want to reach people with, and you want to find out yourself, how do we live today? How do you guys live? You are young. Well, you need to know. I can't tell you, but at least I can try to answer the question for myself.
Well, I think time is up, but that was a beautiful answer. Thank you so much.